Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 68 of It's Never Sunny in Seattle, a Seattle Mariners podcast. It is Sunday, December 11th as we record this. I'm your host, Anders Jorstad, joined by my co-host, Mikey Ahedo. And just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Reminder that you can join our Discord. We will have a Discord link with the show notes. The place is popping. We're really loving the community that's kind of forming here in Discord. It's very fun when news happens. People like immediately post the news and then everybody talks about it for like 30 minutes. And it's like your own little discourse, except for you have less ridiculous opinions than you get on Twitter, I feel like. So it's a fun time and you should come join us. And then the other thing is a thank you to our new patron, Willie, for subscribing to our Patreon. Mikey, how are you doing this weekend?
I wish we signed Kodai Senga.
I know.
Otherwise, I'm fine.
Yeah, so I guess we have the opportunity to get to that later in the show, but I kind of want to talk about that because it's the most recent news here at the top, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Two of the players that we as a podcast were the most excited about were right-hander Kodai Senga and outfielder Masataka Yoshida from both of those guys coming from NPB. And both of those guys signed with different teams. So Yoshida signed with the Red Sox for a pretty big deal, 5 years and $90 million. But when you add on the posting fee, it was 5 years, 105 from the Red Sox side. And then Senga just signed 5 years, $75 million. And the reactions to those two deals were pretty much the polar opposite. Everybody thought that the Red Sox overpaid for Yoshida, and everybody thought that the Mets underpaid for Senga. I think both of the deals as they happened made sense for the teams they happened for. The Red Sox, after losing Bogarts especially, were just freaking desperate to get a notable player on their roster. So the fact that they quote-unquote overpaid for Yoshida doesn't really surprise me. And I think it's a good fit given how much they really need an impact player. And then the Senga signing, you're going to get every time a deal happens, especially one that looks like it's relatively team friendly, you're going to get the hand wringing of, my team should have matched that or should have exceeded that offer. And based on what we know about Senga, I think it's entirely likely that a team or even the Mariners specifically did match or exceed that offer. And Senga reportedly really wanted to play for a winning team. And while the Mariners are, presumably going to be a winning team, they are much less sure to be a winning team than the Mets are right now. And because of that, I totally understand him signing with the Mets. So I'm not really pressed about either of those deals, not going to Seattle, but I don't know how you feel about that, Mikey.
And it depends. And I'm sure Jerry will tell us whether or not, they extended an offer. And shout out to Cespedes Barbecue. They had Jerry on their pod a couple days ago, probably about a week ago.
It was during the meetings, yeah.
During the winter meetings. Really a really funny episode. Then in the end they quiz him on his, I don't remember, 200 whatever trades. They give him a handful, Jordan specifically, who has tracked every trade, quizzes him on different names that he's traded for in a way. So I'm a little skeptical, what I'm sure that they did make him an offer, but I'm not sure that it was competitive. Just because based on what Divish has reported about how much they're going to spend, sounds like it's about 15 million left in the budget for this next year. So, did they offer 8 million? I don't even know if that's the kind of thing that you offer, but yeah, it's really disappointing, but it's hard to beat the now, second WAR team, at least in projections, for a player who wants to be really competitive, and rightfully so. So yeah, I don't blame Senga. Don't blame the Mets. They're doing what every, fan of every team hopes that their team does. It's pretty cool. So yeah.
It's funny because I went to school in New York and I have a lot of friends who are Mets fans and a lot of friends who are Yankees fans too. And I'm seeing a lot of Mets Twitter have a very strange take, which is that they're worried that Cohen is spending all this money. And I just replied to one of my friends and I was like, dude, it's not your money. And
It's
every
not
other
your
team would
money.
kill to have an owner like Steve
That's
Cohen.
so weird.
I mean, yeah, and this is I think you and I have talked about, every fan base has kind of a different personality, I suppose, behind it, or like a different prevailing personality. And one of the prevailing personalities behind Mets fandom is that they just, everything is the wrong thing to do. And I guess the Mariners have that to some extent as well, but like they never seem satisfied with anything the team does. They let DeGrom walk and people were upset, and now they're signing all these players and people are wary of that. So but I did want to agree, and recommend that, everyone go listen to that podcast episode by Baseball Barbecast if you haven't already, the one where they interviewed Jerry Dipoto. You got a lot of interesting information about how Dipoto thinks in that interview too, because they kind of asked him, why do you think that you trade more than other teams? What is it about your philosophy that leads to you guys trading more? And basically what he said was that, when they go to a team with wanting to trade, they lay out very specifically, here's what we want, here's what we're willing to give up. Are you game or are you not? And that leads to very fruitful conversations because they don't, they don't mess around. Basically, they don't try to fleece anyone, at least that from what he was saying. They don't seek out, we're going to try and just absolutely destroy this team in a trade. They try to approach it from, what does this team want, and do we have what they need, and do they have what we need, which leads to, very good conversations. He also said that before they even talk to anyone, they have internal discussions where they decide internally where the highest is that they're willing to go, and that he thinks they're very good at not reaching past that point. And he did note that an exception was the Luis Castillo trade, which he said, in that instance, it's very difficult during the summer, especially if you're making a big upgrade, you have to overpay. And he recognized that, he went a little bit beyond where they wanted to go, but that he knew it was the right thing to do. And I thought that really shed a lot of light on what I think is likely their entire process as a whole. I'm sure that's how they approach free agency as well. I'm sure they earmark a certain number of years and dollars for a free agent player before they set out to speak with that player. And I'm guessing if that player goes over the bounds, they don't sign that guy. They don't go beyond what they think is reasonable. And I think that's why we're seeing the offseason that we're seeing right now. And I know, Mikey, we kind of wanted to dive into this later, but it seems like a good time to talk about hashtag the discourse around the Mariners not really making big moves during this winter meetings, and really since they made those two trades for Hernandez and Wong, which is that, the Mariners are in a position where they should be wanting to really augment their team in a big way. They made the playoffs for the first time in 21 years, but they didn't. They won one series, but then they got swept by the Astros. And it's clear that there is a gap between the Mariners and the Astros as it currently stands, and that the Mariners should look at this offseason as a way to close that gap and really make themselves a division, if not favorite, then contender. And I think that, that quote from Dipoto, even though it wasn't about free agency, really speaks to why we haven't seen it, which is that the contracts have been extremely player friendly this offseason, and that's great for the players. I'm very happy for Trey Turner, for Xander Bogaerts, for Aaron Judge that they got these massive deals, but I'm not surprised that Dipoto and the Mariners were not willing to reach that. And I don't know how many contracts I have seen signed to this point where I have said to myself, like, I think the Mariners made a massive mistake not going for that deal. I think the Senga deal is maybe an exception, but again, like I said earlier, I don't know how much of that was just Senga wanting to play for the Mets, or playing for a team that looks like it will likely be a World Series favorite. So I think my main takeaway is yes, and I had a Twitter thread about this, I think last week, is yes, I think that the Mariners should have gotten one of those big players. I think we'd be a lot better off if we had a Bogarts, if we had a Turner, if we had a Correa, whatever. But I'm not I think people are overreacting. Big shocker. People on Twitter overreacting to the fact that Mariners haven't done that yet, because this team is still likely to make the playoffs. They're more likely to make the playoffs than not. They may not be, much higher than a 60 to 65% odds to make the playoffs, but it is more likely in 2023 we were watching the Mariners in October than not. I think people are kind of forgetting that when they think about the fact the Mariners haven't made that big upgrade. It's not all of a sudden this team is going to win 80 games and we're going to be sitting on the couch, watching other teams in October, which is possible whether they signed Xander Bogaerts or not. It's possible that that was going to be the case. But I think that the Mariners, the way they have gone about this offseason so far, has still been a way to improve the team, even if it's not, the super sexy splashes. And I know that Mikey, you and I are kind of, I guess, more sympathetic to Jerry's line of thinking than many people are in that regard.
Yeah, and I think, well, when you mentioned earlier, like every fan base, and obviously, like they're not monolithic, but every fan base having their flaws. Like I think the Mariners, because they've been so miserable for so long, and I mean, actually have mostly run a decent payroll. Um, I think for Mariners fans, it's spend or bust, and we talked about pre-show, like yeah, I guess just being more sympathetic to it. Not definitely not carrying water, but uh just, like I think two things can be true, that yes, Jerry just gave however, I guess we'll see in when I'm fucking 40 how how long the Julio contract ends up being, but he did give out money to Julio. He did give Ray a contract. He gave Castillo a contract. He's probably going to extend Kirby, Gilbert, Raleigh, in the next several years. Probably not Raleigh. Maybe Raleigh. Um, and that can be true. And it's also true that right now I believe they're 17th in payroll, and probably won't be top 10 by year's end. I think the more frustrating thing is, as Jerry's saying, we view ourselves as a mid level, market, um, to like top 10, to like back in the top 10. So essentially, like max, number 10, and more their minimum, or not even minimum, but just like baseline is 15. And I don't think that's quite right. I think I think it's pretty clear that in terms of market, that Seattle's in the, the latter half of the top 10. So both things can be, frustrating, but I would not have wanted to give Xander Bogaerts 11,280 or whatever it was. Um, I wouldn't mind giving 11 years to someone. And again, I think the conversation that we're having about AAV is a little bit, it's not quite right, because we've seen in the past couple years, and especially this offseason, it feels like players are saying, okay, you don't have to pay me 30 million uh, a year. You can pay me like 26, but you're gonna have to give me another extra couple years. And it's really just the raw, total money that players are after, which makes sense. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm frustrated too, but there are a lot of signings where I'm like, I don't think this makes sense.
Yeah, and I said this earlier. I do think it would have been better to try to sign a Brandon Nimmo than to trade for a Brian Reynolds, which they still might do, and we can talk about that a little bit later. Because all you're sacrificing is money and not prospect capital. And if you sign a player, a big player, you're raising the floor for the next few years, which is, the goal is to make the playoffs these next few years. And if you do that, then who knows who will win the World Series. If you just give yourself a shot each year, and you can raise the floor, and without trading the prospects needed for a Brian Reynolds, you can ensure that that next wave will hit the second that your older players start declining, and then you keep that sustainable winning going. So I think that's where my frustration comes from, in the sense that I wish Stanton would open up his pocketbooks and sign just one of those big guys. Um, But from what we've heard, we don't know how much Jerry Dipoto has to do with that. And if he says to them, I think there's other ways we can acquire winning pieces. I think that Dipoto has proven his ability to be creative and to get players that we didn't necessarily expect. I don't think anybody came into this offseason saying, Teoscar Hernandez would be a really good, addition for this team. But, the Mariners went out and got Hernandez for now what seems like a very reasonable cost, especially for what those kinds of players are signing for right now. The Mariners gave up a good reliever and, like their sixth best pitching prospect, which is like super, super reasonable. So I think the Mariners have in fact upgraded this team. I think Hernandez will likely be better than Haniger, although I'm sad that Haniger signed elsewhere. And I think that Wong will be better than Frazier, even though I know you and I have had the discussion before of is Wong Frazier or is he not? But I think that, Wong is likely to have a better season this year than Frazier had last year. And Teoscar is likely to have a better season this year than Haniger had last year. And everybody else is returning. So that is definitely an improvement on the roster. The question is at this point, what are they willing to do to upgrade this team now? Is it to go out and trade for a Brian Reynolds? And we've talked about packages before. I think there is, now that we've really considered it, there is a potentially reasonable package between like Brash and Kelnick and Harry Ford or something for Reynolds. But I don't know if that really helps the Mariners in the long term or not, because those three players are players who, in theory, are pretty integral to not only winning in the next 2 years, but winning in the next 5 or 6 years. Or they could make, smaller additions like we've talked about, Will Myers, a JD
Mm.
Martinez. There's all sorts of additions out there. So do you think that the Mariners approach to this winter has been do you think we'll look back on this offseason so far and say that this was a successful offseason, or do you think we'll look back and wish that they had made one of those big contract commitments?
I feel like if there's not any money being given out, that it's disappointing. Um, you know, I think when you think about the Wong trade, it's basically just an equal amount of cash exchanging hands. Um, the Swanson deal, I think, is about the same. Yeah. No, they're
It
probably
was
taking on a little bit of money.
The Mariners did take on a good amount of money because Teoscar is a last year of arbitration eligible player, and Swanson maybe was a first year ARB player, if that even, and then Matchko is just a minor leaguer.
Yeah. So I think it's disappointing in that way. And like, so I'm actually looking into it, and I'm wondering like what the Mariners net at the end of the year. So operating income. Do you know what that is?
I
To
do not.
me, that well, I don't know what it is either. I googled
Okay.
it, but to me, my understanding is that it's the like when you factor in your operating costs into your revenue. It sounds like the Mariners net like $30 million a year. Um, and so I'm like, I'm trying to think like John Stanton. I just I feel like this is why teams don't spend, because like if that's the kind of uh if that's what they're working with, like these guys are, they're obviously billionaires, but they're cheap fucks, and they're not going to, you know, uh that's like a who made 30 mil this year? Trey Turner? Like that's the difference between Trey Turner and not. So again, not carrying water, just trying to get into that headspace of like trying to cut costs and like whatever. Because we've seen that the only guys that spend are Steve Cohen and allegedly the Padres owner, who's like had some sort of cancer diagnosis, allegedly.
Oh, wow.
Uh, and is just saying fuck it.
Right.
So maybe that's what's happening.
Well, there's also the Rangers guy, right? Like the Rangers are doing something
True.
super interesting, and I'm actually I if I was a Rangers fan, I would be like low key concerned. They're doing the one thing like Dipoto has advocated against, which is spending all of your money at once. What Depoto's basically saying when he says, the payroll has gradually gone up, is that Dipoto believes in a steady buildup of payroll. It makes more sense to distribute the wealth over the years so that you don't have it all. You don't have three albatross contracts on your books at once, and three 38-year-olds who are making $30 million, and there's no way you're going to get rid of that. That's kind of what the Nats are dealing with right now with Strasburg and Corbin. Um, that can be a problem for a team that claims itself to be mid market like the Mariners. Um, so the Rangers are basically betting on the fact that they're going to be a winner in the next 3 to 4 years. And if they're not, then you'll have an aging DeGrom, an aging Semien, and an aging Seager, all of which who will not be, they will not be getting a good return on investment for the Rangers. So it's an interesting scenario, and that's, I guess, kind of like what I think a lot of people want the Mariners to be, is to be like the Rangers, where they just are handing out big contracts because that's how they want to augment their team. But Dipoto came in and inherited a team that had done that. Basically, they signed Cruz and they signed Cano and they signed Segura. Well, Segura was on an extension and Seager was on big extension. Felix was on a big extension, and those were, that was a core built upon big aging contracts. And right now, the Mariners have a core built on young players, many of whom are quote unquote cost controlled, aka underpaid. And you have to wonder, should the Mariners be prioritizing signing a Xander Bogaerts for 11 years right now, when that may prevent them from giving an extension out to a Logan Gilbert or a George Kirby in 3 or 4 years, because they have all these contracts already on the books. So, it sucks to think of it that way, because you don't think about like losing players in the future as like an investment to work for now. You don't think about, we're spending money now so we don't have to worry about it later, which is, I guess, what they did with Julio, because it does not improve the team in the present because Julio is here now. But I think that's kind of what they're operating with, as you kind of alluded to earlier. And that means that you're, getting these shorter deals or these trades for players who are going to cost less. So I think that's kind of, the two ways that it could have gone. And every offseason, Mariners fans want them to splurge on the best free agent. But I think we know at this point that that's not really going to happen, except for maybe next winter with, famously Mr. Shohei Ohtani.
We'll see about it. I mean, God. By the way, I would have given out a lot of these contracts. Like, some of them I think are unreasonable and I think are I'm not interested in. But like, probably would have given that to Trey Turner.
Yep.
Definitely would have given it to Senga.
Yep.
I would have given Judge that money.
I might have given Yoshida that money.
Why not? Who cares? It's not my money.
but that Xander contract, they're going to look at that. I mean, we are going to look at that contract when he's like 35, 36 years old, and he's going to be like a half a WAR player, and there's still going to be 6 years left on that deal.
Yeah.
It's absurd. And this is another thing I said in my tweet. Like, I think that Dipoto would rather give a 15-year contract to a 21-year-old Julio than give an 11-year contract to a 30-year-old Bogaerts. And I can't fault him for making that choice, and I can't fault him for if they choose to give a 7-year extension to Logan Gilbert when they would rather do that than give a 7-year contract to Carlos Rodon right now. Even though giving that extension to Gilbert does not make the team immediately better, it raises the floor for future years. And you have to be thinking about not only 2023, but you have to be thinking about every year afterwards, and this window as a whole, and how long can that window be. I think you and I and everybody else wants this team to be good in 2026 and 2027, but we may not have that as our priority right now. But if you don't think about that now, then you're going to come to those years and you're going to be like, well, shit, this team is in a really bad spot.
Everyone's gonna bully us on Twitter now and call us the,
oh yeah,
I don't know, the Cake Boys. you gotta think about what the cake looks like after it's baked.
I think, and I think that you and I have both gone through the 5 stages of grief during this winter. Like we definitely went through the stages of, oh my god, I can't believe the Mariners are not doing anything right now, because you and I came into this winter being like they got to sign one of the big four infielders, and I think that we just have come to a point where we understand why that's not happening, and it's frustrating, but we have to accept that we are not the Dodgers and that we are not the Mets. And as much as we want ownership to be that, and we're mad at John Stanton for pinching pennies, I think that we have to kind of accept what we have, which is a quote unquote mid to top 10 market team. And um, all the belly aching in the world is going to change that from our part. And, Dipoto kind of said that too. I think Dipoto was like, we will not be pressured into giving out top contracts. It's basically like, you cannot bully us on Twitter into giving out
Did you say
absurd
that?
contracts. Yeah, he said that we will not be pressured into giving out big contracts, which I think is like to Mariners fans, shut the fuck up. You're not going to make us spend money just because you want us to. But
Jerry, if you're listening, you're kind of a wiener, but I get it.
so, I want the team to be good. You want, like, everybody wants this team to be good. And I think the team will be good. I wish they would sign a really good player. I wish they would sign an MO because it would be much better for the long-term health of the franchise. But
Dude, can you imagine if we were the Orioles right now?
oh, so do you want to talk about the Orioles?
I
Yeah, the
mean,
Orioles sold this summer after, they were in contention. And it looks like if they didn't sell, they probably would have gotten a playoff spot, by the way. And they did that. And after that, they did that. Their GM was like, hold up, like, don't be mad. We will spend in the winter, we promise. We will make it happen in the winter, we promise. And they have done jack shit, which, yeah, that would suck.
I would hate it. I have, mutuals on Twitter who I follow, and they signed Kyle Gibson, which I actually like. I think that's a nice, signing for like a year or whatever. I think he fills out the rotation, but it's like they're a pretty similar team just in terms of having a young core, having some, other decent pieces, having just, been within a couple games of making the playoffs. And the same is true of us. We were a couple games away from, more than a couple, but, several games away from not making the playoffs. Uh, so I don't know. I think regardless of what team you are, like the offseason is probably going to be frustrating if you're not the Mets or the
There
Padres.
there are a lot of teams that just haven't done anything yet. And the Mariners have actually done things. And it's not good enough to say we have it better than some teams, because in order to win the World Series, you have to have it better than everyone, literally. But yeah, like the Rockies perpetually do nothing. And if they do something, it's like signing a reliever to a 5-year extension. Like they don't really do anything. The Guardians don't do a whole lot. They signed Josh Bell, but they, the last couple of off seasons, they haven't done a lot. Um, and there's plenty of teams that are good that have mostly sat on the sidelines, not just this offseason but the last few. And it's I think Red Sox fans are incredibly frustrated, and they are in a much worse spot than the Mariners are right now, and they have already made a couple of interesting signings. So it's not just about quote unquote winning the offseason. We've had a couple of offseason victories, I think, in years past that didn't turn into anything. But do you think there's any of these big contracts that will age really well?
Um, yeah. I mean, the thing about contracts too is like a lot of the time, I think the kind of saying is something along the lines of like you're paying for what they were,
Yes.
So if you're talking about, and also it's just made up, you know, it's all it's based on, whatever,
Yeah,
the current
it is
market.
all made up.
Um, I think Judge is going to be good and hopefully healthy. I think Turner, research shows that uh, elite speed ages really well. And he has elite speed. I mean,
Yeah,
pretty
look at
much
D
the
Gordon.
guys. Yeah, not that. Um, um, Kodai Senga, obviously. I think that the guys that we are bummed that we missed out on, like are going to age well.
Yeah,
The Giants are really optimistic about Haniger too, about his health, which I don't know why, but
it's super interesting that whole. I mean, listen, good for Haniger. I would have easily given, and we know the Mariners did not match that because if they had, then he would be in Seattle. I think it's
yeah.
very strange that Seattle did not match that. I guess Seattle must not be optimistic about his health because I bet you they were like somewhere in the like two in an option or one in an option range.
I mean, I don't think that. I think the shorter term contracts AAV matters more. Obviously.
Mm.
Um, I'm pretty sure I saw in an article, maybe from Divish, that so Hanny essentially kept the Mariners in the loop. Just was super open, being like, "This is what my offer is," uh, pretty much every step of the way. And I think there's a quote from Hollander or something that said, like, "Yeah, we knew pretty early on that we were out," So I think they just weren't going to spend on him, like, ever, if unless he didn't have a market, like he was never coming back.
How does it feel to be right? By the way,
It
at the
feels
beginning of
very
this
good.
offseason, at the beginning of this offseason, Mikey and I disagreed because you said that neither Haniger nor Winker would be on the team next year, and I said both would be on the team next year, and I have taken two very big L's on that front.
So just kicking and screaming just because I was like, they're not fucking coming back. And everyone was like, nah, they'll be back. They'll be back. They'll be back. They were not back.
You have any other shots to call?
Um no.
You're gonna go out
I'll
on
let
top. I get it.
I'll let you know though.
So the
um
Mariners at this moment we know are looking for a right-handed hitting outfielder and a backup first base, third baseman, which and we don't know how big of a right-handed hitting outfielder they want because I think we assume that they are still talking to the Pirates about Brian Reynolds. I don't know how far that'll go, but like that would be a pretty big addition. Or they could go the very like small right-handed hitting addition, like sign someone to a 1 year contract to platoon with Kelnick. So I think there is still a chance for a quote unquote splash, but it would have to be a trade at this point. And first base, third base, I'm really interested in like Justin Turner, which sounds like I think a very weird thing to say. I don't know how interested he would be in a backup role though. So, Brian Anderson might be a thing. I don't know. I don't think the first baseman, third baseman's really going to excite us that they get, but if it's Turner, I'd be pretty excited.
I would, if we're gonna call a shot, I would bet that Anderson or Drury, Brian Anderson or Brandon Drury, start the year on the Mariners. Um, I mean, we know that the Mariners were at least linked and interested in Drury in July. Um, and I'm pretty sure they've spoken to Brandon Drury. Um, so I think between the positional versatility uh and being right hand dominant between those two things, I
Well,
think yeah, they're of interest to the Mariners.
that's interesting because France and Suarez are both righties. You would think that in that case they'd want a lefty, but I guess you're not going to platoon either of those two players.
Well, they can both play in the outfield.
This is true.
Drury is more versatile. Um, but I mean, yeah, and then there's also like Will Myers who can play first base and can play in the outfield.
It's totally going to be something super boring like one of those players, and that's fine. Like I think that's not a problem. I look at the roster as it is right. What were you going to say?
I just think that I think it might be more boring. Like, do you remember all those signings? And I think this is Jack Zrenzik, but like Chris Denorfia and Justin Ruziano. Like, I think it might be something more boring where they get like Danny Mendick.
Oh man.
Like We'll see.
I wonder what Joey Meneses is going for.
No, no, no. Lewis
Could I
Brinson.
interest you in a lightly used Chris Flexen?
Yeah, no. It's over. It's done.
Do you think the Mariners are going to trade Flexen or Marco at this point? I'm kind of having my doubts.
Well, I think this is a good time to answer. I think one of the listener questions was regarding that. Yeah, from Brendan Ryan was him. Thoughts on the team potentially relying on rookie breakout reliever performances? Campbell, Baroa, or Miller come to mind. Any scouting reports available? I think in my head that had more to do with starting pitching, but um, I don't. That's not my perception. And I tend to think that I kind of think that because the Mariners are likely going to do something via trade, that Flexen is the odd man out. Marco's the number 5. Behind him are good enough options in Brash, Hancock, Miller. I think I'm forgetting someone. Bro does not count to me. Dollard. It's probably another. So I think that's good enough. And I think that they also have, the and Cack, our boy, Darren
And
McCacken.
Justice Sheffield, let's not forget.
Yeah, it's technically an option. So I think in terms of bulk, like they're pretty well protected. And Flexen, especially after this market, is probably somewhat interesting to teams. Don't think he's going to net much, but he could be part of a package that is of interest to teams. So I think Miller, really, yeah, all those 3 guys are examples of guys who could come up. I mean, Campbell was protected.
Campbell's definitely going to be in the bullpen this year. If not like right away,
Yeah.
then definitely by like July.
Baroa, we'll see. Bryce Miller, like I think is close enough that towards the end of the year could and probably should get the call. But I don't know. I think what we've seen with guys like Brash and Munoz, who both debuted or didn't debut in the last game of 162 in 2021. So probably more towards the end of the year, or at least after the trade deadline. But I mean, this is probably a good opportunity to talk about the bullpen and also what we just added to the bullpen. Look at these segues. Dang, I should be the host. Just kidding.
Yeah, Mikey and I did seek out to talk about the bullpen and kind of the state of the bullpen at this moment. Kind of in line with this question. I don't know about you, but like whenever I think about the Mariners pitching staff in general this year, I get very excited because this is maybe the first year that I've looked at the staff and been like, this is a very good place to be. Like I feel like the common saying is like you never have too much pitching, but the Mariners might have too much pitching, especially starting pitching, because they have 6 guys with starting pitching experience in the big leagues who would be quality, if not, mediocre starters. And then you have 4 guys waiting in the wings who may or may not be starters. Like Brash and Baroa are like the 2 high ceiling guys. And if either of those guys is a starter, that's super exciting. And if they're not, then whatever, we've got everyone else. Miller is a super exciting starting pitching option. If he's not a starter, that's fine too. Dollard is like a pretty interesting starting pitching option. And then there's Hancock, like these are all guys who will likely pitch at some point this year, and they could all be really good. And even if only one of them is good, that's an extremely exciting prospect, Um, but to the bullpen specifically, I think the what we're looking at right now. I think you can pretty firmly select a few of these guys. Obviously, Brash, if he's not a starter, is going to be in the bullpen. That's 1. Castillo is going to be in the bullpen. That's number 2. I think Matt Festa probably will be. So that's 3. Trevor Gott, they signed specifically for this purpose. So that's number 4. Munoz, obviously 5. Penn Murphy, unless they trade him, I think he's in there 6. And then Seawald would be 7. So you have 7 guys who, like, almost certainly, barring an injury, will break camp, I think, as a member of the bullpen, barring an injury or a trade. And, if Brash is a starter, then you take him away. Okay, sure, you have 6. So you have a couple of spots open. And we've talked about the need potentially for a lefty, I think, so that maybe leaves a spot, maybe 2 open for a right-hander. And I think right now, if we're looking internally, the most likely candidates for that are, one of the guys that they've acquired on waivers. So that would be, Easton McGee. I guess Gabe Spires a lefty. I forgot Chris Clark, who's a Rule 5 guy. So if he's on the roster, he's definitely going to be there unless they give him back to his old team. And then, the prospects. So Campbell, Baroa are, I think, the top 2 potential options there. So we have a big mix. I think that the bullpen is in a much better spot this year than it was last year. There's also Sadler, who the Mariners re-signed to a minor league deal, and if he's healthy, he would, I think, definitely be a front runner.
Do you want to hear
So there's a
something
ton of options.
insane? Guess what Sadler's ground ball rate was on his sinker in 2021?
73%.
More.
Really? I thought I was going high there. What is it?
No. 86.
Wow.
86% of the time the bat was on the ball and it went in fair territory. It was on the ground. It's really crazy. And I think he, again, he's one of those guys that is really interesting because I think he is like a seam shifted weight guy. I think the cutter falls less than hitters expect and runs like a touch more, and the sinker runs way more, like 3-4 inches more. So I think so long as that is back, I'm not particularly worried about the velo. 3-pitch mix is really interesting. So, he showed for 3 years, and one of them being a partial year, that I think his barrels per plate appearance is like 2.5 to like 3.1%. That's really low. That's I think the league average is like 4. Um, he's a legit barrel suppressor. And so long as you have a good infield defense, which the Mariners should, that's a really good thing. Um, I kind of wonder if so. Chris Clark is going to be in the bullpen, like he has to be in the
Yeah,
bullpen.
unless he gets hurt or they give him back.
So, which I guess they've done in the past, like given up
Yeah,
on Rule 5 guys pretty readily. But I think he could just be the Chris Flexen replacement, right?
right.
Pretty
I think he's
similar.
he's probably a long guy. If they have anyone who throws multiple innings this year out of the bullpen, I think it's him.
And they're similar guys, like Clark is huge. He's 6'7". And also despite that, like, pretty repeatable uh mechanics based on what I've seen, plus command, throws pretty hard with, a lot of run. So I think he's like kind of a long guy that can also be kind of a contact suppressor kind of profile. Um so I think the guys that you are moving down are Festus out of options, yeah? I believe he
Yes.
is. Yeah, he's out.
Well, yeah, I think so.
So Festa, and I mean Murphy's the first guy to go to me. Um he's
Yeah.
got 3 options. But yeah, I think if you move Flexen, Chris Clark in his place, Festa can move in favor of, probably a lefty because they're currently projected for 8 bullpen members. They were holding 8 in late August. So I think it's probably about who goes into Penn Murphy / Festa spot, and Chris Clark probably takes Flexen's spot, but I mean I could easily see myself being wrong. And obviously injuries and um, spring training performance, or more so just like what their skills look like in February, March, dictate what happens. But that's kind of what I'm thinking of.
And don't forget Drew Steckenrider, who I forgot existed until now. I
Is
think
he
that
on the
guy is
team
toast, though.
in
Yeah, he's in
AAA?
Tacoma.
Yeah, yeah, he is.
Well,
um,
or did they non-tender him? I mean, he according to Fangraphs, he's still on the team, but
I
I
think
wouldn't be
he's gone.
surprised if
I
he
don't
was
see him.
not,
Yeah.
non-tendered. No,
See if how.
Wikipedia says he's still in the Mariners organization, and they are
Well, Wikipedia. I don't
the
see him on
prime
roster
source.
resource.
Okay,
So yeah, I think he's gone. The prime
but
source.
regardless, so let's talk about the lefty issue. What do you think the Mariners are going to do here? Do you think they're going to go for? There are a couple of internal options: Gabe Spire, Brendan Bernardino, Justice Sheffield. These are technically options for them. Do you think that they'll sign someone, or do you think that they'll go with an internal option? Maybe they'll get a guy in a trade somehow.
I mean, the top kind of couple. I feel like it's someone like Andrew Chafin, you know, who I actually haven't looked into, and I can look up as we speak. But I don't know why I always do this. But I'm pretty sure is a pretty low slot guy, so probably a fastball that runs a lot and a um um like a sweeping slider. Um, and that actually is the same kind of profile that Taylor Rogers has, who I think is the other kind of interesting guy. So those are like just a couple. Is she even dead this year? No. Actually, I think he might throw over the. I, I don't know. He's got some weird pitches. But I think both are probably interesting enough options. Chafin throws like 92, so I think I would rather. I'm interested in I was fascinated with what I think Service said about Eric Swanson, where saying he's he's kind of our like almost loogie type role. Not loogie's not much of a thing anymore, but like his role was to get lefties out because of a splitter. Um, and so you do have the option of getting a right-hander that throws a good changeup um or splitter, which is like I don't know Michael Givens, who also throws a really sick slider and I love and has a good fastball. I think is a free agent. So those are just like a couple guys off top that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, Jerry, his biggest contracts up until Ray were relievers. Like the Zipchinskis. I guess he went out and got Sean Doolittle. Like these are technically things he's done in the past and things he could do. Keenan Middleton's another example. I don't know if that's really the way that the Mariners want to go now. Is to hand out a decently sized contract to a reliever, especially given where they are with money in general. I feel like it's much more likely they either use one of these traits in a right-hander they have to get lefties out, or they like trade for someone, or they sign a couple of guys to minor league or small deals. Like maybe we see a Trevor Gott size deal for a left-hander. I don't think they're going to be top of the market. I do not expect them to be in on like a Chafin, but
Or
it's all possible.
you have Devin
I don't
Sweet.
know. So Devin Sweet, I forgot about him. He's definitely an option. Does his stuff play against lefties?
I've heard some. Let me check. I'm pretty sure I've heard some pretty insane things about his changeup metrics. I gotta type it in. Oh, maybe
So
not.
just for those of you who are unaware, Devin Sweet was a non-drafted free agent. I forget when. I think this was like 4 or 5 years ago, before the draft was only 20 rounds. He was not a guy who teams really that interested in. The Mariners turned him into a very interesting bullpen option, although he has not been super good in Double A the last couple of years. He had a 5.28 ERA in 43 games. 68 strikeouts and 23 walks in 58 innings. So it's not like he's been as dominant as, for example, Isaiah Campbell, but he is definitely a guy who I think could be up in the next year or two.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any. I'm really just searching through my DMs. Sometimes people send me interesting tidbits, and I'm sure there's something there, but I just know that his changeup's really legit, and
Hmm.
obviously that's a good lefty neutralizer.
I think he was best changeup in the last Baseball America ranking of the
Yeah,
Mariners farm system.
no, it's really good. Can I interest you in a Nick
No,
Margavich's?
no, you cannot. Next question.
Yeah, no, sorry.
Is
So
Mishevitz?
yeah,
What did we do with Mishevitz? Did we trade him? Did we? Oh, he went. Oh, he went to Kansas City for
we traded him to the RNC.
was he one of the guys we sent to Kansas City for Carlos Santana? Yes, he's in Kansas City.
Oh, is that who?
It was him and Wyatt Mills, I think.
Interesting.
So he
Well,
gone.
yeah. Um, so I think, I mean, this is cool though, right? Like, if we went in to the season with, and I'm just gonna read off roster resource projected bullpen: Seawald, Munoz, Diego Castillo, Matt Brash, Penn Murphy, Trevor Gott, Matthew Festa, Chris Flexen. That's pretty good. Like that's I don't think the scariest bullpen, but that's pretty good. To have Seawald, Munoz, Brash, and maybe Gott is good. And maybe like Murphy and Festa and Castillo, pitch to, their kind of ceilings. Those are all interesting guys.
Yeah, I think the Mariners pitching staff in general looks like it'll be once again the strong point again. But I think people are potentially getting bored of us talking about the bullpen. So let's jump into some questions that we got from some faithful members of our Discord.
Indeed.
Um, let's start with the sillier one first. So famously, Mariners fans are talking about cake on Twitter because a couple people made some cake analogies and everyone decided to make a meme of it. What is your favorite kind of cake? Kev wants to know.
um, I think one with Aaron Judge or Kodai Senga baked into it.
That's
Um,
disgusting, King.
yeah, that's pretty gross. That would have been great. We'll see. We'll see what's in the cake by
That's
the
right.
end of the or beginning of the season. But
That was the analogy, was like don't judge the cake before it's baked on the Mariners, and the icing might be really good. We haven't seen the icing yet. I whatever.
I do wonder if there's like something that if that was just being kind of um, uh, holier than thou, or if there's information there. Whatever. Anyways, cassava cake is up there for me. I make a really fucking good cassava cake.
Oh, so there's an ongoing inside joke between my girlfriend and I, because when she asked me what my favorite cake was, I said a sheet cake, which is like not a type of
Ew.
cake. It's just like a giant cake. But that's the vibe, like if you go to a birthday party and they have a birthday cake, like I'm just very basic. I do love red velvet too, though. Red velvet's pretty good, but
Oh
I
well.
anyway, that's my answer to that probably unserious question. Let's get to a more serious and very thoughtful question from B. B says, for most fans, the goal for your team is to win a championship. Most fans and most teams will experience more disappointment in this regard versus success, which is true. Only one team can win the World Series. And unless you're the Astros, you're not really competing for one every single year. So they want to know, where do you each find the most joy in your own fandoms, and how much rests on your team chasing a championship? So, Mikey, I want you to answer that first part of the question first.
I think in it's when I started writing at Pitcher List. So I think late 2018. Um, I remember, and it might have been like, yeah, I think it was about that time. I remember the Mariners going through a lot of those scandals where they had the camera operators like zooming in on women and like just doing weird shit. You had Lorena Martin getting fired. You had sexual assault or I guess sexual harassment. Um, I don't even want to call them allegations. Like a lot of things, especially happening towards women in the workplace. And then there was also that at the time, it had been 17, 18 years since the Mariners had made the playoffs. Uh, they also were in a much different place than they are now. That was like pre Kelnick trade, um, or I think at least right before. And that was a moment where I was on the verge, and that was before I, wrote out Lookout Landing. I was on the verge of kind of just changing my fandom, because it felt bad to support the team. It felt bad to watch the team. Um, and that was a point where I started writing about, I cared more about baseball, MLB as a whole than I ever had because I was writing about it more. Because it had always been about the Mariners to me. That was why I liked baseball. Um, so I think, I get really sentimental when I think about like why I like baseball because I like it because my dad liked it and made me like it. We used to watch together. So I like when I think about my own fandom, um, it's because it's something that I fixate on, during the day. It's something that I've always loved since being a kid. I think there could reach a point where if the Mariners, if they're on some shit like that again, like I think it'll be too hard to separate church and state. uh to, separate a lot of the icky shit, and a lot of that is like the financial stuff too, from, just the more childlike enjoyment of just watching the Mariners and enjoying it. So it makes it a lot easier when the on-field product is, is enjoyable to watch. And I think a lot of that is trying to make it that, I guess. Um, so chasing a championship, yeah, I think matters a lot. But at the end of the day, I just spent 20 years between them, very varying levels of trying. So I think, in my heart, it's like, yeah, I'll probably always be a really devoted Mariners fan, but God, it really sucked for a lot of years. So I think
Yeah.
that's my answer.
When I was in school in New York, most of the friends that I had that were baseball fans were not Mariners fans. They were, like I said before, a lot of them were Yankees fans and Mets fans, but you kind of had a little bit of everything. I had friends who were Red Sox fans and Phillies fans and Nats fans and all over the board, right? Um, and it was interesting, like seeing baseball through their lens. It was totally different than seeing baseball through the lens I had at that point, which was the Mariners hadn't been in the playoffs since I was 6 years old. And so I had never really seen them make a playoff run. So the way I watched baseball, I think, was different than a lot of these people watch baseball. Not to say I didn't want the Mariners to win, but I would watch for the smaller storylines a lot of the time. You would look for, players breaking out, and for, the fun stories, the interesting stories, there was always something, right? And it wasn't always just like wins and losses. It was a lot of it was, is Justin Smoke gonna be like the next franchise level first baseman? I was really excited when that happened, and the team wasn't really going anywhere. But I remember, and this is gonna sound so sad at the time, and I'm sorry for dredging up this memory for so many people, but I remember the day the Mariners acquired Justin Smoke, and I said to myself, for the next X amount of time, I will not be watching a baseball game in which he is not batting. And that was exciting to me at the time because I was like, this guy might be super freaking good. And I had never seen a franchise player develop in front of my eyes, So I was hungry for that moment to happen. And so to see Kyle Seager really be the one who did that was just like so thrilling. Even though Seager never made the playoffs, just like seeing him come from, prospect, pretty unheralded prospect, to, the franchise star for a while, to being a guy who everyone thought about. The first player anyone who isn't a Mariners fan knew was Kyle Seager for a while. Um, it was just fun to watch the development of that. And even if the Mariners don't make the playoffs this year, which I hope they do, it'll be fun just to see the continued development of George Kirby and the development of Matt Brash and Jared Kelenic, put it together. I'm excited for those storylines in addition to watching the team try to win games. So to me, that's one of the main reasons um, why I, still like watching the team even when they're not playing well. The second part of the question was adjacent to this. Even though we would all generally like teams be willing to spend money, if your favorite teams became an expected front runner year after year because of a perceived buying of their team, a la the Yankees for many years, would that change your feelings on the team in any way?
So I feel like there are probably a couple ways to perceive or interpret this question, and I think the way to interpret it is, kind of like buying championships or playoff appearances.
Right. Is it less of a championship if you buy your roster than if you develop the roster?
Yeah, this is something that I've done a complete 180 on, in the past decade or so. I had a friend in, elementary school through early college who, uh, big Yankees fan, and I always, was like, "Fuck the Yankees," they just buy championships. Like they're not smart. They just, they have money. Uh, that's not true. So that there's that. Um, you know, I I think the thing about big market teams is like small market teams are fascinating because they can't really slip up and they have to be ultra efficient. And so up until probably a year ago, 2 years ago, I really liked the Cubs around the time that they won the World Series. I really liked the A's and the Rays. I don't like any of those teams anymore for different reasons. And for the A's and Rays specifically, it's because they don't pay their own players. They also don't pay any players. Unless you count Zach Eflin, who somehow is the Rays, most like highest paid player ever, and he's like not even a frontline starter. Um, so I think, you know it maybe doesn't sound good for a team to just like the Mets to just spend way more than everyone. But at the end of the day, when you look at it from a player perspective, from a labor perspective, those are the teams that are shelling out money for players to get paid. And you need teams like that to drive the market up and for players to get their due. Um, so I would love it actually. I think it'd be really rad. uh, and if they were if they outspent everyone by 100 mil every year, uh, people might complain about it, but I would think it's pretty cool to have good players on my team. So I think that's kind of my perspective.
I think it's a little bit more complicated than that because let's say the Mariners released their whole roster and they signed an entirely new roster filled with, new players who are all really good and they won a championship. I think we'd be excited they won a championship, but I think there's also something to having guys come up through your system or having guys be on the team for a prolonged period of time and watching those players win. For a long time, the famous phrase was Felix is ours and you can't have him. And there was something about that like fan ownership of a player or the being able to solely enjoy that player's success that felt good. It's like we are the ones that get to enjoy this and nobody else does. And there's something that feels good about that. And I think we feel that way about Julio now, right? Like I think if the Mariners won and they didn't have Julio on the team, we would still be very happy, but it would not feel as fun for us or as fulfilling for us as having those players who we can like claim as the players that we get to enjoy nobody else does. Um and I don't, I think quote unquote ownership is a gross way to look at a player. So that's why I'm trying to put it in the perspective of like we get to enjoy watching this player play for our team and nobody else does. I think that there is something to that feeling, of getting to say, this player represents this city, and he doesn't represent your city. So I think for that reason, it would feel different if like we were winning because we had all these players that we had no association with, really.
I don't think it's mutually exclusive. Um, I don't know. I guess when I think about a lot of the higher spending teams right now, I don't know if many of them have that many, organically developed players. But I do think about the Mets paying Nimmo, paying Diaz. Obviously DeGrom's gone, but I think when you think about what makes sense for the Mets, it's probably having a player that can pitch more than, I don't know, 86 innings or whatever. So yeah, I guess it is a little more nuanced, but at the end of the day, would rather guys, a team that is shelling out money to players, and that includes their own. That includes what we're doing. The Mariners are doing, and I don't necessarily think it has to be a cheaper option, but yeah.
Where I think it was King Hippo brought up about the fact that like that it's weird to put ourselves back in the mindset of like, we should be happy when players sign big contracts. And it feels gross to think about things in the ownership lens of things, but we do in the end root for Laundry. Like, I don't know about you, but I am planning to root for the Mariners in 2040. At which point, none of the players I currently know will be on that team, and so for that sake, I am rooting for Laundry, and that it's hard to really square that with the fact that we want the players to get the money they deserve, because we are rooting for the team. We are not really in the end rooting for the player individually. But when you think of it, when 2040 comes around, we will have relationships and emotional feelings around these players that to this point we do not know exist. So it's not really that simple, because there will be someone in 2040 who is our new favorite player or players, and just because we don't know that person yet doesn't mean that we won't feel that when it comes around. So I hope you guys enjoyed that sappiness here at the end of the podcast. Mikey, do you have any final thoughts before we sign off here?
I'm excited to talk about the Brandon Drury signing next week.
Emergency podcast coming soon.
Also, get well soon, Evan.
Yes. Evan is dealing with a little bit of a head cold issue, and so he will be here. Just
he's on
we're
the 15-day IL, retroactive
yeah.
to December 2nd.
So yes, hopefully we'll be enjoying these conversations with Evan again soon. But yeah, I'm Anders, and you can find me on Twitter at Anders Jorstad. You can find Mikey at _Kuya Mikey. You can find Evan at Evan James Audio. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. And additionally, you can support the podcast on Patreon by going to patreon.com/NeverSunnyInSeattle. Thanks for listening. Go Mariners.